From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Wednesday in late January, a few weeks away from the start of spring training in Sarasota, Florida. John is decked out with a nice sweater from Marshalls that has an A initial on it. First question, what's the A stand for?
Average. Average. Aggressive mediocrity.
Does that define you?
That's what we strive for here.
You strive for average?
If you are mediocre but you do it aggressively, people are like, "Wow, he's getting the job done."
I think here at the Banner, we we strive for relentlessly interesting.
Yeah,
that's what we're told.
Yeah, can we turn this? How do you make an R? Wrong side.
An RI for relentlessly interesting.
We could do that. I'll keep going to Marshalls and see if I can get an RI sweater.
Yeah, Rhode Island might be fitting.
Gosh, it's gonna be so annoying when I show up with a Rhode Island sweatshirt in like 3 weeks, isn't it?
You ever been to Rhode Island?
Yeah, I'm from Connecticut.
Right. What is there to do in Rhode Island?
You go to the beach right over the Connecticut line. There's some good beaches. Squamicut. Used to go there. Park the car, drive up there. Obviously, park the car after you drive there. A lot of we had a station wagon with back-facing seats. Back when those were still allowed. I feel like it was the tail end of that being allowed.
Yeah, that's a no-no now.
So me and my buddies, we'd always bring a friend and wave to people in the back, bang on the table. We'd wave to people in the back, and there was like a good water slide park that we went to after.
Nice.
Also did my little honeymoon in Newport, which is a lovely place.
Oh, that is lovely.
The Pawtucket Red Sox used to be there.
That's right.
They're no longer there.
This is good. Maybe I'll add this to the summer weekend trip.
You should. It's pretty nice. Newport is cool.
Okay.
I like it a lot. The beaches are nice. You could do Rhode Island.
Okay.
You just got to get through Connecticut first from here, which is like
the
a real
part.
Pain. I basically describe where I live to people, like where I grew up in Connecticut, as like the part on 95 where it just randomly goes from 3 lanes to 2 and you start driving 40 miles an hour, which is identifiable for anyone who has done it. And I'm like, yep, right there. That's me.
All right. Well, maybe I'll skip through Connecticut. I don't know how. I'll just go all the way around. Might take more time, but anything to avoid Connecticut. Yeah. On today's show, we're not going to be talking too much more about Rhode Island. We're going to be talking about the Orioles' latest free agent addition. Dylan Carlson, outfielder, who was a former top prospect for the St. Louis Cardinals, split time last year between the Cardinals and Rays, and where he could fit on this roster, if there's a chance that he could make this opening day roster, because that is frighteningly close. So let's talk about Dylan Carlson, John, because last week we talked about Anthony Santander's departure for the Toronto Blue Jays. And one of our points was Santander's departure leaves a bigger hole in the outfield in the future, beyond 2025, than it does in the immediate future. For this move for Dylan Carlson, this doesn't change the long-term future of the Orioles outfield. They still have question marks there. It's still a question of whether Mullins is coming back, whether Heston Kjerstad can be a long-term starter. Those are all questions that will be answered down the road. But in terms of this current roster, they're okay in the outfield. They have Tyler O'Neill now signed. They have Colton Cowser. They have Cedric Mullins. So the addition of Dylan Carlson, I think, was interesting because you could look at the outfield and say, you could see 3 or 4 guys there that you'd feel very good about. Ryan O'Hearn has outfield versatility as well. Jorge Mateo has been described by the Orioles as somebody who has versatility out there. So you weren't necessarily expecting an addition to that outfield.
Yeah, I think this is, as I'm thinking about this type of move and what it ultimately means, like this is a depth move. This is something that, even if he spends time in the minors, like in the olden days, the Orioles would lose out on like good players who could be depth because they couldn't be like, we're going to pay this guy $1 million. And like, maybe he will be useful and maybe he will not. But like, if we need him, it will be good to have him. Like, this is what they're doing here. Dylan Carlson, for a variety of reasons, did not kick on from that top prospect status. He had some good spells in St. Louis, not recently. He's more of like he's a much better right-handed hitter at this point in his career than a left-handed hitter. But this is the type of player when you talk about having some upside, having some flexibility, some versatility, and adding quality to the Orioles 40-man roster. Like this is the type of thing you do, because if you do hit on him, then all of a sudden it is like the kind of bridge we're talking about. He would still be under club control next year for a much, pretty reasonable cost. And then you aren't really worried as much about what you're going to do in the post Cedric Mullins era as these other guys are moving and shaking. So it's an interesting it's an interesting move. I thought they were going to kind of go more towards the like minor league free agent route. I was kind of looking at like a Ty France or someone they can be like, screw it, let's see if we can like coax 20 home runs out of this guy who we can just invite to camp and give opportunities. But the words that they've used, I think Mike Snyder in a lot of pieces last year, as they were talking about Albert Suarez, for instance, would ring in my ear when he said, we don't like to tell guys there's an opportunity when there's not. Like, we want to be known on the market among agents, among players, that like if the Orioles tell you like, we're going to have innings for you, we're going to have a role in the rotation for you at some point, or we're going to have meaningful, spring training opportunity that could lead to big league at bats, or you'll be the first guy up. If they tell people that, it's because they want it to be true and they want people to believe that it's true. So for Dylan Carlson to sign a big league deal here means there's probably some kind of opportunity for him that may not meet the eye.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I'm glad you draw the contrast between the old school beginning of the Mike Elias era, where these kind of contracts would be signed with somebody like Rougned Odor, who signed, I think, $1 million or $1.1 million contract several off seasons ago and was inserted right at second base. He was their starting second baseman. Maikel Franco was signed closer to opening day before the 2021 season, I believe, and he was their third baseman for much of the season. This is not one of those moves, and I do wonder if they really believe that Dylan Carlson has a very good shot of making this roster. In terms of what he brings to the table, he's 26, so he still is pretty young. This contract is worth $975,000 with a $25,000 bonus if he hits 200 plate appearances, as reported by our own Andy Costco, the Baltimore Banner. He was the number 33 overall pick by St. Louis out of high school back in 2016. He peaked in terms of prospect status at number 13 in baseball in 2021. So he was very highly regarded. Debuted in 2021 with St. Louis, had his first full season 2021. That was his best year by far. Hit 266, 18 homers, 780 OPS, 3.1 WAR according to Baseball Reference in 149 games. Finished third in NL Rookie of the Year voting in his age 22 season. You think the sky's the limit. The St. Louis Cardinals have found another great young outfielder. And then it started to go downhill. 2022 took a slight step back. Hit just 8 homers. 2023 hit just 5 homers. His OPS is going down each year. And then last year started out very poorly for St. Louis, gets traded to Tampa Bay for our old friend Sean Armstrong, a 1-for-1 deal. How about that? And then hit slightly better with the Rays in the second half of last year, hit 219 with 3 homers, which was an improvement off his 198 average with 0 homers with St. Louis at the start of the year. But did not improve his value enough that the Rays wanted to keep him. So they granted him free agency in November, hit the market, and was an intriguing, like you said, high upside buy. But there are a lot of reasons that this did not go well since the 2021 season. His StatCast page is pretty much a mess. It's a lot of blue. The only really things he has done well is not chase, and he's walked a good amount. But other than that, what do you think the Orioles see in Dylan Carlson here?
Well, I think there's always going to be value, especially in this organization, as you talk about their swing decision emphasis, of guys who don't chase, guys who make good decisions in the strike zone. I think you saw that. If you want to go back to Ryan O'Hearn a couple of years ago, there were some things that were good and there were some things that were less good. Obviously, a lot more hard contact with someone like Ryan O'Hearn, but it seems like it's really come down to just the left side being kind of an issue for Dylan Carlson of late. When you get to, it was described to me as like an issue of like adjustability, where like he's either on fastballs or he's not on fastballs, and like what you do when you're on a fastball means that will influence what happens if you get spin. And pitchers know you can only hit one of those. You're only going to get the one you can't. So I think that's something that the Orioles know how to work with. That is a lot of body position. That is a lot of hand position. There are countless examples, and I should have actually looked at his swing before I started the sentence or even started this conversation with you, but like there are countless examples of the Orioles adjusting where guys hold their hands to allow them to get better, flexibility and movement through the zone. There are guys who have held their bat, straight up, and they've moved it a little lower, and that allows them to get a little more adjustability and vice versa. If the guys, they want to be somewhere in the middle, and it was described to me like if you want to be one or the other, like you need to have a really good reason and it needs to like work.
Yeah.
So I don't think, especially if somebody who has the pedigree, has the makeup and the thoughtfulness that I've been told Dylan Carlson has, combine that with the humbling experience of the last couple of years, like I'm sure he's coming into a program that is able to help him, and he knows it.
Yeah, and his switch hitting ability obviously is a draw for a team that just lost their best switch hitter, one of the best switch hitters in baseball, and Anthony Santander. But like you said, the splits are pretty drastic in his career. He hits left-handed pitchers way better. Hitting from the right side of the plate has gone way better for him than hitting from the left side of the plate. Yeah. 792 OPS against lefties when he's hitting from the right side of the plate, and just a 655 against righties. So could probably be used as a platoon type player. I can't imagine the Orioles would ask him to switch back and forth too often, but that does add some versatility. But there's no question this is going to be a project for Cody Ashley, who's just got the promotion to hitting coach. I mean, the 28th percentile or 28% strikeout rate, 195 expected batting average last year, just 2.5% barrel rate, 26% hard hit rate. These are all well below average. These were his numbers from 2024, according to StatCast. So it's going to be an uphill battle. And he has that center field versatility. He's played the most of his games in center field, but was used pretty much exclusively in a corner outfield for Tampa Bay after he got traded last year, and still registered negative defensive run saved, negative fielding run value, according to StatCast. So he has that ability, but certainly it's going to be a project for him offensively, and there might even be some questions defensively.
Yeah. And on the project part, like this is somebody, the Cardinals were, before the Orioles guys who work here now work for the Astros, they work for the Cardinals. Like the Cardinals were kind of one of those cool, like progressive teams. And like, I think they'll be the first to admit that things stagnated there. So like, I have no idea the extent of like what they're teaching or what they're coaching or how things are going. I know they made a concerted effort to add a lot of like coaches on the minor league side recently, and they've overhauled their major league staff to a certain extent. I know they were looking at the Orioles on both the hitting and the pitching side as like models of what to do. So like, there's a world where Dylan Carlson is going to be hearing things he hasn't heard before. And like, these are, the light bulb aha moments. And like, all of a sudden you have a player here, but
right.
The ability to do a lot of things can sometimes like mask the ability to not do a lot of things well. And I think that the Orioles are in a good position. And, this is something we've said about I've said a lot about a lot of these offseason signings. They're fine. Like, it's not like going to move the needle, but it's just they end up needing him to be, if Tyler O'Neill goes out for 2 weeks with a hamstring strain and they need somebody to play 6 times in those 2 weeks against lefties, like you can do a lot worse than Dylan Carlson.
Yeah.
Because going like the internal depth chart is like, are you moving things around? And is it a Jorge Mateo? Is Jorge Mateo healthy? Is Jorge Mateo in one of those stretches where he has a 600 OPS for 2 months? Like, are you trying to squeeze Manuel Rivera in and then moving someone? Like, there's a lot of things that you could do that aren't as good as just sticking Dylan Carlson out there as an insurance policy. And with Tyler O'Neill, you might need that insurance policy more than you would have if we're talking about somebody like Anthony Santander, who's in there 155 games a year.
Yeah, I mean, think about how much the Orioles had to rely on Austin Slater in the final 2 months of the season. I mean, he was on the Orioles playoff roster for a guy that they picked up really off the scrap heap at the trade deadline. A lot of heads were turned. He was on his 3rd team in like 2 weeks. People were questioning that move, and he figured some stuff out in Baltimore. Obviously was a much older player and was hit from the right side of the plate. So there are some pretty big differences there, but the Orioles ended up relying on that type of player, on that 5th outfielder a lot. It's just a question of right now, we're a few weeks away from spring training, and right now, seemingly, so far as we know, everybody's healthy. That won't be the case in all likelihood by the end of spring training. But when you look at the roster right now, with everybody being healthy pretty much, and we're expecting that, you're talking about 13 position players on the opening day roster, assuming they go with 13 and 13. I have 10 of those guys as locks.
Okay.
I've got 2 catchers, Adley Rutschman, Gary Sanchez. The 4 infielders I think are absolute locks. Gunnar Henderson, I think he's going to make it. Jordan Westberg, Ryan Mountcastle, Ryan O'Hearn. 3 outfielders I think are locks are Cedric Mullins, Colton Cowser, and Tyler O'Neill. Then it's a matter of the is that 10? That's 9. I've done my math wrong. That's 9 total.
Yeah, there we go.
That is 9. Never mind. All right, so we got 9 locks.
All right.
Then we're talking about 4 spots to hit 13, and we're talking about a battle between a bunch of players here right now. Ramon Arias, Jackson Holliday, Kobe Mayo, Emmanuel Rivera, and Jorge Mateo. I think Ramon Arias is closer to in than he is out.
These feels locky to me.
He feels pretty locked in because he can play multiple infield positions. We saw how he was in the second half of last year when he was healthy. I think the Orioles like what they have in Ramon Arias, and they're going to keep him.
Yeah.
Other than that, though, so you're talking about now maybe 10 locks.
Maybe
you know what? Let's bump that number back up to 10. Let's include Ramon Arias in there. So then we're talking about 3 spots that they're fighting for. The reason I included Jorge Mateo on the bubble, the Orioles just came to an agreement with him to avoid arbitration, by the way, is because his Tommy John surgery was at the end of August last year. And the timeline to come back is always foggy when it comes to position players. It's different with position players than it is with pitchers. The ideal timeline was like Bryce Harper between 2023 and 2024. Harper got his surgery done November of 2023. He was back in early May 2024. That like shattered the record for fastest return for a player from Tommy John surgery. If we use that same timeline, which is 6 months, that would put Jorge Mateo's return in February. So he would be maybe back playing spring training games by the end of the month. That feels idealistic, and this can always take longer. So the reason I have Jorge Mateo on the bubble here is because I think there's a very good chance he starts the season on the injured list, and then it takes maybe a month, maybe longer for him to come back.
Yeah, and you know, without knowing, I know Shohei Ohtani basically DH'd after his Tommy John, and I think Bryce Harper mostly played first in DH last year, if I'm not mistaken. So Jorge Mateo does not have the option to do that. He's going to need to be throwing at like a full capacity, and I think that's going to influence the Orioles' timeline. I believe Mike Elias's language, what the last time he was asked, I believe it was at the winter meetings, was that like he will be doing stuff through spring training, and like there's like it's like around the beginning of the season when they think he would be ready, and whenever, you know, over the many front offices and iterations of like doing this around spring training, like it has always felt to me like teams will always like make the easy decisions first, and if a choice of like losing a player on waivers or putting somebody, you know, not having someone on the team versus, you know, having them on the team, like first you do all the things that you can do and that are easy to do. And like Jorge Mateo being on the injury list feels like it would be an easy thing to do, just to kind of kick that can down the road to the extent that they can. So that's kind of where I would start. And I feel like that's probably fair.
Yeah. And we can save the outfield or the infield conversation, I should say, for another day. The 2 other guys that are fighting for spots, because the first list was just infielders, are Heston Kjerstad and Dylan Carlson now.
Yeah.
We can throw him into that mix. The Orioles, obviously, if Mateo is healthy enough to play, they've talked up his ability to play in the outfield. That gives them another potential center fielder, corner outfielder that they could use out there. But beyond that, the Orioles showed last year that they're comfortable rolling with 5 outfielders on the big league roster at times. That was what they went into their wild card series with against Kansas City. Do you think that Dylan Carlson has an actual shot of either being the Orioles' 5th outfielder or somehow overcoming Heston Kjerstad for the 4th outfielder job?
I would think that this is more 5th outfielder territory. I don't know a universe where they don't give Heston Kjerstad a shot to just play a lot this year. To the extent he's going to be the 4th outfielder, I don't think they're going to sit here in January or whatever we're in and say like Tyler O'Neill was signed to be a platoon outfielder. But if it's May and like things go the way I think they're going to, and like they probably will go, he will be not that will be Heston Kjerstad's spot. He has been biding his time. He has been tabbed for a bigger role this year, and I don't think this signing would take him out of that.
Yeah. And his inability to play center field is not ideal for a 4th outfielder, Kjerstad we're talking about, and let's be honest, his subpar defense last year, and he could take a big step. Look at the step that Colton Cowser made defensively between 2023 and 2024. But, you know, he's a slower footed, and just has shown some lapses at times in the outfield, which is understandable. Everybody's going to be playing in a new left field next year, so who the heck knows how that's going to go. But, you know, that is not an ideal prototype. These are not ideal traits for a 4th outfielder. But Cedric Mullins, Colton Cowser, their defensive versatility should make up for that. You know, the fact that you have 2 starters who can play all 3 outfield positions at an above average level makes up for that. And even when the Orioles signed Tyler O'Neill, they said, we believe he can play center and we're going to give him opportunities there. So maybe his defensive metrics would indicate he's going to be better served playing in right, But if they believe they have 3 center fielders already, you may not need your 4th outfielder to play all 3.
Yeah, and if this feels like to me, I said at times last year, especially after he was not playing every day, that like Austin Hayes was like overqualified for the Ryan McKenna role.
Yeah.
Dylan Carlson feels less overqualified than Austin Hayes, but still quite overqualified for that. And this all comes down to, and I was thinking as we were talking about it earlier, like this comes down to like who the Orioles are when they've been good and like who manages this team. Brandon Hyde still loves to play these matchups. He likes to be flexible during these, within games. They like to play the matchups. Most of the time it works out pretty well. It is frustrating to watch. Let's not kid ourselves. Like there are times when feel very good.
Yeah.
When you're like, why isn't so-and-so playing? Like there's going to be a time when Preston Kerstad has 2-3 hit games in a row, and then a lefty comes up and he's not playing because Dylan Carlson will be in. Like that could be annoying.
Yeah.
But that is the type of thing that this team has done and does well. So this is just another opportunity to do that. I think that for lack of a better term, we've talked about it on the coaching side. We've talked about it a little bit on the pitching side, though not as much. Like they're really relief side for sure. They're really just leaning into like what has made them good. They're operating in a different financial stratosphere than they were this time last year. They are players in free agency in a different way than they were last year, but they are doing the things that made them good. It's not like they're like, all right, we got money now. Like we're going to go sign a bunch of guys to like 5-year deals because we can. Right. They're not doing that. They're doing what they know they do well. And I think this is just a small piece of it, but it's a piece of it.
Yeah. And obviously Tyler O'Neill, I don't expect in any world he would play 150 games if he were healthy, just because of his splits and his ability to hit left-handed pitching. But then you also add in the injury history, and that's obviously a major concern. When they signed him, the Orioles said they were confident that he would, there's nothing long-term that they would feel would constrict him going forward, but he has been injury plagued through a lot of his career. So if he ends up on the injured list, if Cedric Mullins, who has missed time over the last several years, ends up on the injured list, if Colton Cowser ends up on the injured list, like you said, there are worse options to have than Dylan Carlson in there.
Yeah. And I'm like, go beyond that. Like we're talking about, like Nick Gordon is like a utility guy who was signed as minor league depth. There's been some minor league depth, but there's a pretty large gap between what the Orioles have at the big league level and like the Dylan Beavers and Judd Fabians, who basically just got to AAA last year and are not going to be considered ready for a long time. Daz Cameron, how could I possibly forget Daz Cameron?
Right. How could you?
He's back. He's back, and like maybe we'll see him. Honestly, who knows? But there is a large gap between the guys they have playing every day and the guys who would be considered like their prospect depth.
Right. And Dylan Carlson has 3 minor league options. So if the Orioles need to pull that lever, they will. I have, they've shown that in the past that they can move guys up and down. So that definitely gives them some versatility. But if you were to guess right now, John, I know it's impossible because moves can still be made. We're still not yet at the date that we keep referencing, which is February 1st, which is the time that the date last year where the Orioles traded for Corbin Burns. We keep saying, well, the Orioles traded for Corbin Burns on February 1st last year. So don't say the offseason is done by any stretch. But I'm going to put you on the spot. Is Dylan Carlson going to make the opening day roster, if you had to guess?
Yes.
I say yes, too.
Yeah, because I think that the infielders, the non-everyday, I guess there would be an everyday second baseman. I think Jackson Holiday makes the team. I think Urias makes the team of the guys who weren't on like the lock list. That would get us to 11. Kerstad is absolutely on it for me. No question. That's 12. And then you need another outfielder, and he could do that. Like I think there's a world where somebody plays their way onto the team as a non-roster guy. I think that will also have a lot to do with roster contract stuff. So if somebody is too good to pass up and has an opt-out and needs to get added, like Dylan Carlson's an easy way to get that 26-man roster spot. But sitting here right now, it seems like that last spot is his.
So that would mean that Jorge Mateo would start on the injured list in this scenario, and that would mean Emmanuel Rivera, Kobe Mayo would not make the team. I mean, I think that's probably what I would say as well at this point. I am not anticipating, and I frankly don't want to see some shenanigans right before opening day like we saw last year where Tony Kemp gets signed mere days before opening day at Camden Yards as Jackson Holiday starts the year in AAA and then comes up a week later. and then Tony Kemp does not record a hit in 10 plate appearances. I don't think that that's necessary for this team, barring major injuries. I would far, far more prefer that the Orioles, if somebody goes down in the infield, Kobe Mayo is your first call. If somebody goes down in the outfield, you have 5 outfielders there with Dylan Carlson in mind.
Yeah. And I'm already, like in succession, like, Roman like pre-grieved, so he wasn't really didn't have to grieve his dad. Like I've already
Spoilers.
Sorry. I think I'm okay on that.
Yeah.
I've already worked out. Like I'm not gonna have if there's like a spring training where Kobe Mayo has batting like 500 and like smokes a ball spring and doesn't make the team. Like I've already like pre-accepted.
Yeah, I mean
it's different than last year in that like there's not a spot just sitting there for him.
Yes.
Similar with Grayson Rodriguez the year before, but it still feels like we like to do things we've already done. When we're talking about the Orioles, so it's like get mad about stuff we've been mad about before, and like get excited about stuff we've been excited about before, and like this just feels like it has all the ingredients, and I'm not going to.
I mean that's a conversation we're going to be having a lot before opening day. Which who's going to obviously make the roster, and is there room for a young guy? Because you go back a couple of years. I mean, go back to even Adley Rutschman's rookie season. He suffers that injury at the beginning of spring training and ends up not making the opening day roster because of that. But he might not have made the opening day roster regardless. Look at Grayson Rodriguez, who did not make the opening day roster. Now, he struggled mightily in spring training, in at least the games, in terms of games.
Yeah.
Whether he was working on a new thing or not, his numbers were not good. So there was a reason for him to not make the opening day roster. He comes up and makes his debut against Texas a week later and, has some iffy performances, but ultimately finishes out his season pretty strong.
Yeah.
And then last year, Jackson Holliday has a good spring training. He looks like he's got the inside track for the second base job, doesn't make the team, and Tony Kemp gets signed off the street and gets a spot on the opening day roster. So if Kobe Mayo doesn't make this opening day roster, it's pretty much par for the course, right?
Yeah, it feels like it's like a knowable thing at this point, you know, and I haven't taken the time yet to go through who they're playing the first few weeks of the season and what their rotation is going to shake out like, and see if they're just going to play a lot of righties or play a lot of lefties and all that.
I don't think they know.
But I also didn't do that last year, and like that turned out to be like most of the reasoning why Jackson Holliday wasn't on the team.
That was the reason they gave for signing Tony Kemp. Was we're facing a lot of lefties the first couple weeks of the season, so we're signing Tony Kemp, who doesn't need to start every day.
And there was also stuff going on with Jackson Holliday. It turned out that he needed to make some changes, and my thought as I'm getting worked up about something that I didn't want to think about was there needed to just be an opportunity to figure that out. And from the moment there was, even though he didn't have a lot of AAA time, he didn't really have a lot to learn there.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to prove, but to learn.
Yeah. And this is Heston Kjerstad has to make the opening day roster. Essentially, if he's healthy, there is an open spot for Heston Kjerstad to make the opening day roster. There's every reason. He's not somebody that we should see down in AAA. Kobe Mayo, there may not be a definitive path for him to make the opening day roster. And if they'd rather give him time in AAA, that would be a little bit more understandable.
Yeah.
But if the Orioles were to say, we want to go with 4 outfielders and Dylan Carlson's making it over Heston Kjerstad, fans would have a understandably much harder time accepting that.
That would feel strange to me.
That would feel very strange. But anything's possible, John. You never know.
It's a scary thought, but it's true. It's a scary thought, and it's true.
Yeah. Well, we will talk more about opening day roster predictions as we get into spring training. But we also got some news on the front office side for the Orioles this week, and that's that the Orioles are adding 5-time All-Star Adam Jones as a special advisor and ambassador, guy that you covered in his last few years in Baltimore. Obviously, one of the more outgoing, great to talk to members of as Michael Elias described it, as the last good Orioles team, essentially, as the run of that team that made it from the playoffs 3 times in 5 years. Somebody who has gone on to do podcasts, one podcast that was on the Baltimore Banner within the last few months, and somebody that has been open about the fact that he wants to give his knowledge and lend his expertise to the next generation of Orioles players. And I think that this is a perfect match between the Orioles getting a voice in the room who has that big league experience and has the Baltimore experience, and Adam being able to share his knowledge.
Yeah, and I think he comes from an area where like there was a lot of former players. He mentioned Cal Ripken Jr. not being around as much, but like there were a lot of former player voices who were around as coaches, as instructors, as advisors. And I appreciated how Adam said that he understands, like, you know, he's not a coach. He's not here to like be in the weeds, but like he can say things to players that coaches cannot say. Like,
yes.
It might feel a little weird coming from like an executive, you know. He can also probably say things that Michael Elias can't say to players. But having done it and having that experience, that is valuable. The Orioles added a lot of experience in free agency this year. My understanding of a lot of the players that they've added firsthand and secondhand is that like they're good dudes and like they're there to improve things, but like the Orioles have their fair share of good dudes. Like they need, I think Adam Jones's like approach to things and like bluntness and attitude can help to the extent that he's going to be around to.
We know Adam's going to be blunt. We know he's going to say what he feels.
I'm thinking about, it was like Kansas City, the year that he was like kind of playing out the string, like didn't get traded. Like the Orioles were going in other directions and there were other guys who were playing, and like it was like a Sunday morning and Adam always used to get donuts, like the best donuts in whatever city.
He loves his donuts.
Yeah.
2018, I guess this season was.
2018. He got like donuts delivered on Sunday morning. He wasn't in the lineup. He like was really insistent that I eat one. And like I was in the mood for, it was a Sunday morning. So I was, you know, after a Saturday night and I was in the mood for a donut, and he was just looking around. He's like, looking at the players who are playing. He's like, I don't know, man. Like, and like, it's honest. It was honest. And it was really like, you know, it was a moment where like, you realize like, this is a dude who like has been through it and has been through the wars. And like that was not a team made for him. And that was not like a situation made for him, but like, he knows what it takes. This team, that team battled, and like, he is somebody who is going to be able to impart that knowledge, because we look at what this Orioles team needs. Like, they've done a lot of stuff for roster. Like, you can't look and be like, yeah, they need Corbin Burns, but like Corbin Burns is gone. Right. There's only so much they can do to like work on the edges, roster wise, like, philosophy wise. Like, they're not making major shifts. They're making tweaks. We know that. They're not making super high long-term plays, but they're trying to make this team as good as possible. Like, little stuff like Adam can provide is useful to me.
Yeah, it's another step in the Orioles' clear attention to adding experience to the room, in addition to Cody Ashley getting the promotion to hitting coach. I think that's something that they highlighted when they made that promotion, is he's somebody who has the big league experience. He's been through the rigmarole of a big league season. You know, he knows what it's like to be a big leaguer, and he can say stuff perhaps more directly or speak from a deeper base of personal knowledge than somebody who hasn't. And I think that that's you know, this adding Adam Jones to this role is another sign that the Orioles want to lean more into the guys that have been through it before on the field. And I think that that's a good reason. I mean, this team, you know, yes, they lack, like you said, yes, they lack Corbin Burns. That would, he would certainly be a big piece, but he wasn't the reason that they lost in the playoffs last year. I think there were a lot of reasons on the hitting side that they tightened up down the stretch. I think that there was just an overall lack of guys who had been through playoff runs where their teams had reached the mountaintop, and they didn't add too many, you know, they didn't add World Series winners per se. Charlie Morton is a World Series winner, 2-time World Series winner. But they added those guys around the edges as well, like adding Adam Jones as special advisor, adding Cody Ashley as somebody who has the big league experience. So interesting.
Yeah, it is going to be fascinating to see, I guess, the attitude that this team takes on. And like, I'm not saying that like Adam Jones, who lives on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, like isn't going to be here. He's not going to be like a daily presence, but I think it's all part of it, in that like, I'm very fascinated to see the attitude of this team. Nobody's going to like show attitude at the Birdland Caravan, although I wouldn't mind it. You know, nobody's going to show attitude in spring training on report day when you have 6 weeks before the season starts and you're just there, you know, getting your work in and trying to make sure you're ready for the season. But like last year, they were very experienced based on what the experience they had. You know, they won a bunch of games. they got punched in the face in the playoffs. It was over. That was the experience that they carried, and they rightfully went around like spent the year being like, we know what that felt like. We don't want it to happen again. We know what it takes. We've been there. We've done this now. Last year was not a good experience. Probably like it was a good team overall. Like for them to win 91 games in those circumstances was good. There are teams that would have lost a lot more games than they lost. But they got swept out of the playoffs. They scored 1 run. It was or 2 runs. It was bad. 1 run.
1 run.
1 run. Not good. And like I want to see them be mad about that. Like Adam Jones would not have been okay with that playoff performance. And that's not to say that like he can have a huge influence on that, but like I want to see a little bit of that in this team. And like I'm going to be watching very closely to see if they have that, because honestly, you need it. Like there's a lot of nice guys in that clubhouse. People say it all the time because it's true. Adam Jones is a nice guy, but like he was also like a serious guy. And these guys are serious too. There's just an edge that I think there's room for on this team.
Absolutely. Well said. One more thing that we should touch on before we leave. Former Oriole Austin Hayes signs a deal with the Cincinnati Reds. Remember, the Orioles traded him to the Phillies at last year's deadline to get Sir Anthony Dominguez and Christian Pache, who was off the roster a few days after that move. But the Orioles absolutely, to look back at that move, hindsight is 2020, absolutely won that trade.
Yeah. And Austin Hayes was dealing with, I think, a kidney infection, it turned out to be.
He had some injuries, and then that kidney infection did not help him.
And just Philly. Not a good year. Like he started out in spring training, like he got sick twice very early in the season. That impacted his performance. Credit to him, he got back to the point where he was, a viable player who should have been playing every day somewhere. That's why he was dealt, because he had earned that right, and the Orioles didn't have that opportunity for him. I'm glad to see him land in a place where he's going to get to play every day. I think that there's also, just like we're talking about with Adam Jones, there's valuable experience to what he gained for a Reds team that like has a lot of like young talent and is trying to make that step. Like he knows what that looks like. He knows the rhythms of those seasons. He knows the beats. He knows the moments that are like, we can go from here because, we just did this and it was cool. Let's go win 10 games in a row now and like solidify ourselves as good. Like that's a valuable thing to add to a team. And I think there's an opportunity for him to be a really productive player. And we think about adding like a Dylan Carlson, for a role that like if he wasn't traded could have been his. Like Austin Hayes is in a better place than he is in now based on the opportunity that would have existed here.
Yeah, he played just 22 games for the Phillies down the stretch, had just 4 playoff ABs, struck out in 3 of them, and then the Phillies just non-tendered him. So it was really rough. It kind of reminded me of when the Orioles traded Jonathan Scope to Milwaukee in the midst of that fire sale in 2018. And then Milwaukee thought they were getting a second baseman for several years that they were going to have as they could pencil in as a starter just about every day. And he struggled so mightily for a team that made the playoffs that they non-tendered him. And that ended up, leading to Scope, I think, signing with the Tigers and, having a few good years switching over to first base before he was out of baseball. But it was similarly Scope and Hayes. At one point, they were all-stars in Baltimore. And then they have a slight dip. The Orioles deal them as they're heading into their 30s. And unfortunately, the wheels kind of fall off.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a ton of examples of this. Even Trey Mancini, like he got a ring that year and then he was, he didn't make it through the first year of his 2-year deal with the Cubs. It is very interesting. There's some players that have, still kicking around, like Jose Iglesias still kicking around, not the same.
Yeah.
But it's very fascinating to me. And when we talked about Anthony Santander and like how it goes when you leave a place that's like this, it's like Baltimore is not a tough city to play. It's not a tough city to live in. It's if you're here, you're here, and it's like pretty nice. And like there's not a lot of.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it. I'm still here. I bought a sweatshirt that just says Baltimore recently.
Nice.
I felt like that was good. That was also on Marshall's, the same trip as this one.
I was going to say, you got that meant something. But the A doesn't.
How do we get sponsored by Marshall's? I guess what I'm asking.
You keep dropping it, and I think if you drop it like 5 more times, then I think that we'll maybe get a sponsorship.
Yeah, cool.
Let's work
on that. I think we could probably make it happen. But that's all to say that like it is hard to leave the place that you have been. And like once the team acquires you, they have no attachment to you. Like Austin Hayes had a lot of equity built up here, which meant it was hard to trade him. It was hard to trade him before they traded him too. That's why he was here so long. And the Phillies had none of that connection. And they made the decision that was best for them. And that's kind of just how these things go.
Absolutely. Well, I think the A stands for awesome because I think this
Thanks,
podcast
Paul.
was awesome, but also you're awesome.
Thanks, Paul.
John?
Likewise.
At John Meoli is his handle on social media. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Please write us a review. Write us a 5-star review, and I will read it out here on the podcast. That's a guarantee. So like, rate, review, subscribe. Even if John writes a 5-star review, I'll read it out here.
So you say that every time. Does that mean we just don't have any every time you say it because you don't read them out?
I plead the fifth there. Yeah, plead the fifth. That's what we're asking. That's why I ask, you know?
Okay.
You can't get it unless you ask for it.
Cool. Yeah. I'm subscribed now.
There we go. That's the most important thing. Is one of the co-hosts is subscribe to the podcast. Of course, you can subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months to get all of John's great work. He's got his newsletter, Inside the Dugout. You've got Danielle Allentuck and Andy Koska and Kyle Goon writing great stuff as well. Before we get to spring training, though, we do have Birdland Caravan, which starts tomorrow. We are hopefully going to be able to talk to some of the players and Mike Elias and get some thoughts on the offseason so far and where these players are as they get ready for Sarasota. So we will report back in a week with what we heard from all of those people. In the meantime, follow him, follow me, subscribe to the Banner.